إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن نبينا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, brothers and sisters, to today's open Halaqa. We keep these Halaqat on Thursdays open in the sense that we cover different topics. Right now, we're still looking at the etiquettes of being at a masjid, arriving at the masjid, the etiquettes inside the masjid. So inshallah we'll continue there for now. From amongst the things that people sometimes do not realize is from the sunnah is to not rush towards the masjid. The sunnah is, if you can be early, to be early. But let's say you are delayed and you're trying to make it on time. What most people do is they rush. If you have to run, you run. If you have to drive a little bit faster, you drive a little bit faster. And this is actually in contradiction to what the Prophet ﷺ taught us. The Prophet ﷺ said, do not come to the prayer running. Do not come to the prayer running. Whatever you miss, make sure to make up for it. And there's so many stories. In general, hastiness is something that is bad. Hastiness, trying to do things as quickly as possible. Usually there is nothing good that comes out of it. And especially when a person is rushing from one place to another place, then they'll try their best to cut as many corners as possible. And there's so many stories that we know of that keep happening where someone was rushing late for Salah. I remember such a story it was in the news in Saudi, and there was one particular mu'addin in Mecca, of all places. He gave adhan in one masjid and he would lead the salah in another masjid. So what happened was, he gave the adhan and then he was running a little bit late to make it for leading the prayer. And he ended up hitting someone and causing, I can't remember if it was injuries or death. Either way, it shows how bad it is to be rushing. It is better to plan ahead. And if you find yourself late, then qadar Allah, you try your best next time. So when you come to the masjid, whether it is when you leave your house or coming from any other place, on your way to the masjid, you should not rush. And especially once you come inside the masjid, if you see people are praying, then you should not run. Yes, we know that in Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us, فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ, then race when it comes towards the khairat, the good, and you should, in a general sense, try to be quick to being part of good. But the Prophet ﷺ told us specifically, do not rush towards the salah. Because what happens when you rush to the salah? You bring yourself physically to the salah, but your mind is still way behind. So you come to the salah, and instead of focusing in the salah, you're trying to catch up. Your mind is trying to catch up. And this happens all the time. This is one of the reasons the scholars have said, when you come early to the masjid, and you pray Tahiyyatul Masjid, and you pray the Sunnah prayers, all those prayers add up and it helps keep your focus. So when you come in first and you pray Tahiyyatul Masjid, that prayer will you might be able to focus in 60% of that prayer. And then you move on to the sunan, al-rawatib, the sunan prayers before the actual prayer itself. Then you push yourself and you try to concentrate 80% in those prayers. And then once you finally come to the salah itself, the fariḍah, then you will be able to focus 100%. As opposed to the person who comes late, does not pray Tahiyatul Masjid, and does not pray the Sunnah prayers. They literally come through the door and they go straight to the Fard prayer. Will that person be able to focus in their prayer? Not as much, because again, they will be thinking about something else. Another point that is important to mention that people sometimes are neglectful of or do not know is that in Islam, if you arrive at the masjid and the adhan is given, it actually becomes haram for you to leave the masjid without praying the salah that the adhan was made for, except in certain circumstances. So let me repeat that. It is haram for a person to be inside the masjid physically, hear the adhan, and then walk out of the masjid. If you find yourself inside the masjid and you hear the adhan, then you have to stay until the salah is prayed. And this is an actual hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. And yet we see many people, they are very careless when it comes to this. So they might be spending all their time in the masjid, and then when the adhan is made, they will leave. This is not the way that a Muslim does things. Obviously, there's exceptions, like I mentioned. If a person, for example, has an emergency, something has happened, they need to rush back home, they forgot something, something very impactful and important that cannot be delayed until the salah, then such a person can go and take care of that and make sure that they pray after it. So this is one point that many people don't realize when it comes to their prayer. Another thing that needs to be emphasized is when a person comes to the salah, let's say late, it is even more important for such a person to try to be as quiet, as silent as possible. Because when the person comes and the people are already in prayer, everyone is already focusing or trying their best to focus in their salah. Any slight distractions, any noise, any sound, any speech will take that focus or remove that focus, and it will take time for the person to refocus again. Now imagine if this happens not once, twice, 3 times, it happens more than 10 times. 10 people come late, and every time it resets the focus. It becomes a problem. So the point here is when brothers and sisters come to the Jama'ah, when they come to the masjid to pray, if they come late for the prayer, it is important that they are even more quiet, that they do not come inside the masjid whilst talking on the phone. This is a common thing. You might have been on a phone call before you come to the masjid, and as soon as you come into the masjid, you're still on the phone, and people inside the masjid, inside the salah, can hear your conversation. So like that, it is important to come in, not to make a lot of commotion when you come in. And this, I can't stress this one enough, this happens a lot. And the scholars have actually mentioned it in many books. They say when a person comes in and they're late for salah and they want to join the salah, then the takbirah, the Allahu Akbar that they say entering the salah, it needs to be with a soft voice. It needs to be with a soft voice. A voice that you yourself can hear, but not people around you. So you might say Allahu Akbar in a normal tone and not the way that many people do. they come, they're trying to catch their breath, they're huffing and puffing, and what do they say? They say Allahu Akbar in a very loud voice. And sometimes when that happens, the consequence is that people are unsure whether the takbir came from the Imam or somewhere else. So you will see some people, when they say Allahu Akbar very loud, you see people moving into ruku' because they think that the Imam said Allahu Akbar. So this causes problems, and it is something that you'll find in many different masajids around the world. When a person comes inside the praying area, the jama'ah, then they will tend to do so. One last point to mention before we'll see if there's any questions. When it comes to praying alone, let's say you come inside the masjid and you come ahead of time this time. So you come and the first thing you want to do is pray Tahiyyatul Masjid, which is 2 rak'at. 2 rak'at, 2 units of prayer that you prayed before sitting down. What many people tend to do is they'll come inside and they'll pray anywhere that they see. Usually they'll pray right in the middle. So they come into the masjid and they'll stand, if the masjid is empty, they'll stand right in the middle without any sutra, without any barrier in front of them. This type of prayer is not something that the scholars encourage, because when a person prays, it is important that they place a sutra, a barrier in front of them, so that people can walk in front of them and things can move. So it is far better for a person, if they come early to the masjid, to find a place in the first row and to make sure that they pray preferably against the wall, or if that is not possible, they try to put some kind of a sutra in front of them. Because what happens without the sutra is you put yourself in a worry. Perhaps someone will walk in front of me, a child might run in front of me, something might happen, and also you put other people into a state of worry because they do not know whether they're able to cross or not. Incidentally, on that note, some people are confused when it comes to walking in front of a person who is praying. This is important to cover. Walking in front of someone who is praying, knowingly, it is haram, without a doubt. There are a hadith that mentions that it is better for a person to wait for 40 years in some narrations before crossing. Yani instead of crossing or walking in front of a person who is praying, it is better for that person to wait 40 years, stand there and wait for 40 years. So you can imagine how important it is not to cross in front of people who are praying. However, the limit that you can't walk in front of a person, and we mentioned this in previous classes, the scholars, they say it is the length of a hand. Meaning if I'm praying, then it becomes haram for people to walk in front of me the length of the arm that I stretch out. Why do you think it is this specific length? Why is it not the length of 2 arms or 3 arms and so on? The answer is simple. The arm length is literally the space that I can control. So if someone walks in front of me and I can push them away, then that is my personal space and it becomes haram for anyone to walk in front of me. But if, let's say, the person is 2 meters away, right? I'm praying here and someone is walking in front of me, beyond the space that I can stop them, that I physically can stop them, then it is not a problem. And stopping people physically when it comes to prayer, if they walk in front of the prayer, it actually becomes mandatory. It is a must to the best of your ability. If someone walks in front of you, between you and your prayer, then you try to push them away. If they keep insisting, then in some narrations it is mentioned that the person can fight them, because now they've been told and they know that they should not walk in front of you. But if the person insists on walking in front of you, then you are allowed Islamically to use the necessary force to prevent that. So those are just some of the things that the scholars mention when it comes to the prayer. Another thing that is worth adding to it, before we forget it, is the importance of cleanliness in general, but also specifically when it comes to attending the masjid. To be clean, both physically and in terms of the religion, it is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ التَّوَّابِينَ وَيُحِبُّ الْمُتَطَهِّرِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those who repent, and He loves those who purify and clean themselves often. And some of the scholars have said that this verse was actually revealed concerning the people of Quba in Medina. These people, the people who lived there, what they used to do was when they would go and relieve themselves, use the washroom, they would clean themselves with plenty of water. They would clean themselves with plenty of water. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loved this act and praised them like that. So when it comes to cleanliness, whether it is from najasa or any other thing, sometimes, especially these days when the weather is getting hotter, just a little bit of motion, and sometimes even without motion, a person might start get sweaty and so on. And Muslims are supposed to be the most clean physically and in other ways too, to my knowledge. Muslims, we pray 5 times a day, we make ghusl when it's needed, we make wudu, all these things. So for someone to come to the masjid and not be as clean as possible, not to smell as well as possible for the men in terms of fragrance, then this is not following the footsteps of the Prophet ﷺ. Imagine you have a visitor, someone who comes to the masjid, and all that they can smell, or the first thing that they can smell is bad odor, whether it is from the shoes or the washroom itself, or Allah forbid from the people with body odor and these sort of things. So these again are points worth mentioning and explaining, and inshallah hopefully we'll revisit this topic again and again in the future. We will see if there's any questions anyone wishes to answer, ask afwan, and we'll answer what we can. وجزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.